Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 10 on Henry and his chief ministers. Oh, my crown's a bit bad. Never mind. We'll crack on. Now, this video, ladies and gentlemen, it follows on from the previous one. We've been looking at the work of Cardinal Wolsey, Henry's chief minister, and we were concentrating previously on what he did in his foreign policy, how he served King Henry VIII abroad in Europe. This video we're going to start concentrating on what he did here in England in one particular special area. So this video is all about I'm getting married in the morning, ding dong the bells are going to chime. Sorry for the terrible singing, but it's all about weddings and marriages. They were to play a huge role in the reign of King Henry VIII, very, very famous for, obviously, his 6 wives. At the same time, weddings and marriages were to play a huge role in the downfall of Cardinal Wolsey. So this video is starting to explain that. Why was it that Wolsey, in the end, lost his position as Henry's chief minister? And right at the centre of the reason for that is, of course, Catherine of Aragon. Now, let's have a look. You've got to remember, ladies and gentlemen, back in history, when the princes and princesses of the famous kings and queens, when they got married, the idea of marrying for love wasn't considered to be very important. Marriages were arranged for politics, for the good of the country. So Catherine of Aragon was the daughter of the King of Spain. Her marriage was arranged for her, and she married Arthur, Prince of England. Now Arthur was Henry's older brother. Arthur was the heir to the throne. King Henry VII had Arthur and Henry as his sons. Arthur was the oldest son, so he would become king. So it was arranged to seal the alliance, to seal the friendship between England and Spain. Arthur would marry Catherine of Aragon. This was all usual, all the usual stuff for back in history. That was normal, all good. But unfortunately for the great plans, after the marriage, Arthur died very, very quickly. Within about 6 months of being married, he died. Catherine, still a young woman, remained in England. And about 8 years later, this is the important part, Catherine of Aragon remarried. And who did she marry? Arthur's brother, Henry, who was now the heir and would become King Henry VIII. Why did she marry his brother? Again, it's not for love. It's to maintain this alliance, this relationship between England and Spain. Now, so she's married Arthur, Arthur's died, and now she's remarried Henry. To do this, they had to get the special permission from the Pope. And the Pope looked at the case and said, yes, Catherine of Aragon can legally marry Arthur's brother, Henry. The reason they gave, they said, the first marriage between Arthur and Catherine was not consummated. That's a posh word for no sex had been involved. So, when the marriage ended with the death of Arthur, the Pope then said, yes, because of this special thing, no consummation, Catherine can remarry his brother, Henry. So we get Henry and Catherine. They are now a married couple. Politically, it worked very, very well. The alliance between England and Spain was maintained, and they were a good team. They worked well together. And as a bonus, there was genuine affection between the two. Catherine of Aragon was a good queen. She was popular in England. She was very religious. She did lots of charity work. She supported Henry well. She was a good queen. Even when Henry was away fighting in France and interested in foreign affairs, as we've seen in previous videos, Catherine of Aragon sent an army up into Scotland to fight against the Scots and King James IV. Catherine's army defeated the Scots at the Battle of Flodden. Henry was very pleased with his wife fighting away there in Scotland for him, so much so that when he was away fighting in France, Henry made Catherine regent. In other words, she could rule in his absence, his temporary absence. So the marriage was going well. All's good. Great news, you would say. There's one major problem. Now, what do you think that was? Well, Henry demanded a son. He wanted a male heir. Why would that be? You've got to go back 500 years. You've got to change our mindset. Back then it was considered to be vitally important for a male to carry on the dynasty, carry on the family, secure the succession. Because if there were males, heirs, princes in other words, that would stop others with claims to the throne. It would stop potential rebellions. It would stop potential invasions or indeed a civil war. So for Henry VIII, the need to have a son, he thought, was vital to the future of his own family and the future of England. Now, between 1509 and 1520, Catherine of Aragon was pregnant many, many times, at least 6. But she only had one surviving child. Remember, medicine was not as good back then. Pregnancy was a dangerous time. Many, many women lost babies. And Catherine of Aragon, unfortunately, was one such woman. They only had one surviving child. And that was the daughter called Mary. Well, Henry saw this as a threat to his Tudor dynasty, to his family carrying on as the rulers of England. On a personal level, it also looked bad for his reputation. Remember, he thought he was the great man. Hooray, I'm King Henry. And he wanted a son. But as time went on, you've got to remember, Catherine was at least 6 years older than Henry. By 1527, Catherine was 42. It was unlikely, therefore, that she would be able to have more children. This left Henry with a big problem. If his wife is too old to have any more children, and they have not yet had a son, and Henry desperately wanted a son, what could he do? Henry blamed Catherine. He said, it's your fault that we haven't had a son. And in a way, he could point to some evidence, because as king, he'd had many affairs with other women. And as a result of one of these affairs with a woman called Bessie Blount, she had given birth to a son called Henry Fitzroy, born in 1519. So Henry VIII could say, look, it's not me. I got a son. I can't have a son with you. It must be your fault, Catherine. So over time, Henry VIII's brain begins to work. He's desperate for a son. He knows he can have a son because he's had one with Bessie Blount. So he sees a possible solution. He says, right, maybe I could end the marriage. I could stop Catherine being Queen of England. How could he do that? How? One way was to do something called seek an annulment. It's a posh word, but basically it means stating that the marriage between Henry and Catherine had never been legal in the first place. and if it wasn't legal, it could be ended. The problem for Henry was that the annulment could only be granted by the Pope. So, this is his way out. He says, right, I no longer want to be married to Catherine. I need a son. I need to end this marriage. We need to try and say that this marriage, excuse me, needs to be annulled. Well, what were his arguments? He's got to have reasons. He can't just say, oh, we're having an annulment. So he came up with some points, some reasons, some arguments. Number one, he could clearly show that their marriage had not produced a son. And he said, the reason for that is God. God is punishing me because I should never have married my brother's wife. That was the first part of his argument. To support this, he used the Bible. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, one of the books of the Old Testament, Leviticus, the book of Leviticus. And if you look up the reference, it says, if a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an impurity. They shall be childless. Now, Henry and Catherine were not childless because they had the daughter, Mary. But Henry still uses this. He says, look, it's against the Bible. I should never have married my brother's wife. It is an impurity. God is punishing me by not allowing me to have a son. Henry's argument. At the same time, remember I said Henry had had many affairs. Well, at his court, his eye had been caught. He'd fallen for a young woman called Anne Boleyn. Now, Henry thought she was beautiful. Henry was desperate to get with Anne Boleyn. Now, she was clever. She just didn't have an affair with him like other women had. No. She refused to sleep with him at first. Said, no, I'm not going to do that unless we get married. So, Henry says, hang on a minute. My wife is old. There's no son. I'm beginning to fall in love with this young woman, Anne Boleyn. So if I get with her, she's young, she's bound to be able to give me a son. And I like her, and I want to be with her. Therefore, if I'm falling in love with Anne Boleyn, I need to end my marriage to Catherine of Aragon. So by now, Henry desperately wanted the annulment. And who do you think he would give this task to? Who would he say, right, you need to sort out my marriage. You need to help me get an annulment from the Pope. Of course, step forward, Wolsey. It's his job. Henry says to Wolsey, I want you to sort this out. It was called the King's Great Matter. So important to King Henry. More important than anything else at this time. And this became Wolsey's main task. He was to end the marriage to Catherine of Aragon. That was his job. Well, how did he get on? How do you think? The answer is coming in the next video. So here we've laid the ground. We've had a look at what was going on between Henry and Catherine of Aragon. Now we know it's Wolsey's job to sort the King's Great Matter. And what he did, next video. As ever, I hope it's been useful. Speak to you soon. All the best now.